Well, hey everybody, this is Robert and welcome to today's show. Now, April 21st marks the beginning of Lab Week 2019, and this is an annual celebration of medical laboratory professionals who play a vital role in healthcare and patient advocacy. Well, joining me today to discuss the medical laboratory profession and the importance of this week is the Associate Dean for Research at the College of Health Professions and the Chair and Professor of Clinical Laboratory Science at Texas State University. Please welcome Rodney Rohde, PhD. Well, Dr. Rodney Rohde, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you today, Robert?
Excellent. Well, another year, another lab week, and which is always a great time to tell the world about the medical laboratory profession. Something you once described as the hidden profession that saves lives. But before we get into discussing the profession and all the great aspects and the prospects of it, can you introduce yourself to the audience? Who is Dr. Rodney Rohde, and discuss your travels in the laboratory field?
Sure. Thanks, Robert. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. So my travels are kind of interesting, I think. I started in my career in public health and actually worked in the world of public health and infectious diseases for about a decade at the Department of Health in Austin, Texas, and also served as a visiting scientist at the CDC for a couple of summers, and really ran around Texas and other parts of the country kind of looking for rabies and hantavirus and other types of agents like that. Really loved that career. But in 2002, I had an opportunity to transition to academia, and I returned to my alma mater, which is Texas State University. And I've kind of worked my way up the academic ladder, if you will, from assistant professor all the way to full professor. And I became chair of the Clinical Laboratory Science program in 2013. I also serve as the Associate Dean of Research in the College of Health Professions. So I like to tell most people that I have kind of a hybrid background. In one side of my career, I've been a public health microbiologist and infectious disease expert, and now I'm currently a chair and kind of research person within the academic setting, and also, as you know, producing future laboratory professionals.
Right. Important stuff. So that leads right into my first question. Dr. Rohde, what exactly is a medical laboratory professional?
Sure. So laboratory professionals, specifically medical laboratory professionals, really fill a role of providing the primary diagnostic data with respect to any types of patient results in laboratory medicine. So we're often in the hospitals. That's probably 80 to 90% of where my graduates and I have worked. And then the other 10 or 15% of our graduates will work in public health or reference labs and other areas. But really, we provide the laboratory medical data for physicians and others in healthcare to make the determination of your health and really your healthcare plan.
So what are the different paths that someone could take in becoming a medical laboratorian?
There's actually quite a few ways to get there. The most direct route is to either become a medical laboratory technologist, an MLT, or a medical laboratory scientist, which is a 4-year degree. So the first one is an associate's degree, kind of on the front end of the career. The second one is the primary 4-year degree person that also fills a need. And then, as you know, we'll talk about perhaps later, we've extended that into the graduate level. But that's the most primary way, is to attend an accredited program in an academic setting, go through that program, and then when you're done with that program, to sit for a bench level national certification and or license to practice.
So can you talk a little bit about the curriculum that someone would encounter if they went into this profession?
Absolutely. I often tell those in the general public, what's really interesting about our major is that our students really have to major. It's like majoring in 4 areas. They typically are going to take curriculum in clinical microbiology, clinical chemistry, clinical hematology, and something called immunohematology, which most people know as blood banking. So it's really 4 significant and rigorous areas across all spectrums of clinical laboratory medicine that they have to be competent in. And on top of that, they also have to understand the regulatory issues that surround the medical lab. They also learn quality control and assurances, and a variety of management and clinical research skills. Quite a
And
rigorous program.
yeah, and unlike a biology or chemistry degree, there is a clinical rotation that goes along with this also.
Absolutely. So typically in most programs that comes a little later. For us, for instance, they do about a year and a half of kind of your typical didactic lecture and laboratory coursework. And they also are preparing for clinicals. One of the last courses they take prior to a clinical rotation is a bridge course that starts preparing them for competencies. But in the last 6 months, you're correct, our students go out into a number of different hospital affiliates that we have around Central Texas, for instance, and they do full-blown rotations, clinical rotations in each area of the lab. So a micro, chemistry, hematology, and a blood banking. And then they also have what's called as a general rotation, which kind of is kind of a floater between all those areas, as well as kind of unique, enriched skill sets.
So if there's a prospective student that wants to get into this field, is there any specific accreditation of the program that they should be looking for? What's important?
Absolutely. So if you're a student looking to get into the medical laboratory academic setting, you would definitely want to make sure that that program is NACLS accredited. NACLS is our primary external accrediting body. They basically ensure that our standards are upheld within the academic setting so that when you graduate, employers know that you have reached these certain bench level competencies and that you can perform those at a satisfactory rate.
Now, someone come out of high school or someone in high school, how should they prep themselves if they're looking at medical laboratory technology, for example, as a profession?
Yeah, the best advice I can give students that are in the high school age is to look at those core courses that we just kind of mentioned, if they are available. So upper level and kind of honors mathematics or those types of courses that are going to challenge them. Anything that kind of gets into the medical side of biology and or chemistry. Again, in high school, this may not be the perfect course, but anything that's going to at least touch those areas is going to be very helpful. And then, of course, the coursework that's more advanced around those areas, anatomy, physiology, things that might help you understand systems of the body or other types of things that align with medicine. And then I would also tell students before that are looking at our program that if they can kind of challenge themselves with casework or investigative work, or where they're doing more writing intensive types of coursework, their presentation skills, all of those will really transition well into our type of major.
Yeah. And you've already touched on that there's an associate degree level, a bachelor degree level, but there's also graduate levels, all the way up to the doctoral level now. Can you go ahead and talk about the master's and doctoral level degrees available?
Sure. So it's really interesting. For quite a while now, there have been master's level programs at the clinical lab science level. Sometimes those are in specific areas like management or maybe a specific discipline like blood banking and so forth. More recently, literally in the last couple of years, there have been some programs that have come out with a doctoral degree called the Doctorate in Clinical Laboratory Science. So these are typically referred to as the DCLS. And there are 3 primary programs in the country right now. One is at Rutgers University up in New Jersey. One is at UTMB Galveston, which is in Galveston, Texas, in my home state. And then there's another one with the Kansas Medical Center. And so those 3 programs now are in full swing. We've had our first graduate. Dr. Brandy Gonzalez is actually out practicing now, and others are in the pipeline and being produced as we speak. It's really an exciting degree that it's going to allow professionals to kind of bridge the gap between laboratory medicine, kind of at the bench level, and what's kind of missing from the physician side, either in their expectation of what that laboratory test means, as well as sometimes actually just knowing which tests to order. As you know, Robert, there is a vast array of panels of tests you can order and different interpretations of those tests.
Yeah, and just to the audience, I've talked to Dr. Rohde about medical laboratory profession several times on the various platforms, and there is actually a podcast out there concerning just this doctoral level degree, and I will link to that on the show notes for this show. Another important aspect of being a medical laboratory professional is professional certification. And depending on the state, in the state of Florida, you require a license. Dr. Rohde, can you explain what all this means to the viewer?
Sure, I can try. It can be a little confusing, of course, but like any kind of healthcare field, and in other fields, I mean, there are kind of these licenses or certifications, if you will, which are a credential that you sit for. So in our field, we have something called the MLS certification. It's given through the Board of Certification by ASCP. That's the primary certifying agency. There are some others out there like AMT, but these are tests that after you graduate from an accredited program, you are allowed to sit for. So you can sit for the MLT at the associate's level. You can sit for the MLS, which is my 4-year plan. And then there are specialist categories. For instance, I'm a specialist in microbiology and virology that I set for later. So all of those are actual theory-based tests that you sit down and take after your program director approves you. And once you pass that test, then you are able to place those letters behind your name, much like any other professional, like a nurse or a physician or so forth. In hospitals, in many states now actually require those for you to work. In some states, we have licensure, which actually accepts the ASCP credential as the license. There's just some extra paperwork, usually in a small fee. There's a couple of 3 states that it's a little more complicated. They have a little more involvement around the types of coursework that are required, as well as the number of clinical hours. And this is not a huge deal, but it's just something you have to be aware of if you're going to practice, for instance, in California, New York, and even Florida might have some unique kinds of preferences around there. But the good thing about this, of course, is that when you have that credential, it shows the world that you have that competency and knowledge base to practice in a hospital laboratory and really kind of keep that kind of quality there for all of healthcare.
Do you see state licensure in the medical laboratory profession to become all 50 states at some point, the way nursing is?
You know, I think if you would talk to, certainly I think it's an important thing that I hope happens in my life. If you talk to my colleagues, many of them would agree with that we're not sure why it's not a licensed type of issue around the country. As you might know, in Texas, I've been president. I'm actually past president of TACLES, which is our state organization that aligns with our national organization. And we definitely are in support of licensure in all states. It's a complicated topic. I've actually written some articles about this that kind of clarify all the nuances of it. But we do support that stance, and it's really going to come down to right now, it's almost a state by state issue because we don't really have a national level for a licensure for our profession. They typically grow out of the state to state kind of form. I think at last count, there's about 13 states, 12 or 13 states that require licensure. And so we're hoping to build on that as we move forward.
Okay, so the individual, they get their education, they get their certification and license, and now they're ready to work. Dr. Rohde, what kinds of duties might one expect in what kind of environments?
Sure. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the primary role of our graduates is to work in a hospital or medical laboratory. And usually we actually encourage our graduates to become generalists. And so as soon as they graduate, all of their knowledge is very fresh. And so we actually encourage them to work as a generalist. It's also the most sought after position. So that means the person can work in all areas, micro, clinical chemistry, blood bank, and hematology, as well as kind of oversee the different things that they might do in a typical area by bouncing around the different areas. That's a kind of a typical starting point. However, there are ways to perhaps work only in blood bank or only in microbiology. If you're out there looking for those types of positions, they are available. And so that's a route as well. Sometimes our students will work in a variety of other areas. if we start talking about outside of the actual hospital medical lab. I don't know if that is something you would like to discuss, but there are those types of positions in public health, for instance, and industry and so forth.
Yeah, we'll jump on that in a couple minutes.
Sure.
All right, so Dr. Rohde, what are the job prospects for a fresh graduate today?
You know, if you're looking in my experience, there are plenty of job prospects. We often tell our students and their parents, for that matter, or their loved ones, that our graduates have 100% employment within weeks, if not maybe a month of graduation. So remember, our graduates have done clinical rotations in a variety of hospital affiliates. And so many of those affiliates, and this is true of all the programs around the country, they're literally trying out, our students as they're training. So they're often going after them and encouraging them to apply for positions. As you know, Robert, this is a major shortage in healthcare for our profession, much like nursing. We have huge shortages across the country, really in all markets. So it's really not an issue of finding work in a variety of hospital settings and elsewhere, for that matter.
Yeah. And a question I'm sure a lot of people would be interested in is, how is the salary for a job like this?
So it depends, as you know, it kind of depends on the geography and where you're starting. But I'll just give you kind of the median type of starting point. If you're looking at the hourly rate, typically it's anywhere from 18 up to $25, $26 an hour in Texas specifically. That probably equates pretty equally across the country. That typically works out to 50 to 60K, maybe a median somewhere kind of in that range. Again, depending on where you live, it can be higher in the Northeast, for instance. If you're talking about Texas, you're probably going to earn more money in the Dallas-Fort Worth area or Houston, the kind of heavy, big, large populations. And then again, remember in our field, if a graduate is working in those areas and they're willing to work the night shift, or if they're willing to work weekends or holidays and things like that, they get a shift differential. So what that means is all of a sudden, instead of $25 an hour, you might be making $29 or $30 an hour, and that really can help your salary.
Yeah.
And then with time and experience, it also increases with management and things like that.
Sure. Now, many medical laboratory scientists actually spread their wings and take their skills into other types of work, in which you were talking about moments ago. Pretty marketable. What else do medical laboratory scientists do along their career sometimes?
Sure, there are just so many. Really,
you're one example.
I am one example. Education. Let's start there. We have a major issue coming up with all of the retirements of the boomers. So there are so many faculty positions in clinical lab and medical lab science programs that it's scary. I get dozens of openings across the country just in education alone. So those typically require a master's degree, but certainly we are looking for faculty. So that's something that people that love training or educating students sometimes find themselves looking at. There are positions in our state meeting last week. We had a young lady that was one of our 2010 graduates, and after about 5 or 6 years on the bench, she started connecting with an industry partner and started doing troubleshooting and installation of these types of equipments across the country. She loved that so much and found she could do a good job at it that she got into sales, and so now she's selling major laboratory equipment all across Texas and parts of the state. Again, those are kind of unique, interesting things. We have students that move into the regulatory area, so those people that inspect labs and do different types of laboratory regulation inspections. We have people that sometimes go into veterinary medical diagnostics. That's kind of where I came. My background was, in rabies and things like that. So there's this whole area of the veterinary health area that people can work in. And just it goes on and on and on, even secondary education. So sometimes people want to get back into the K through 12 education and teach, which is really helpful because they can really turn students onto our field early on. So just a number of things. And then we don't want all of our students to leave the medical lab, Robert, but I mean, certainly we have shortages, right? But some of our students, I'd say one or two out of every cohort of 20 or so, will go ahead and go into, say, physician's assistants program or even med school. Our curriculum and coursework is very useful in preparing you for medical school and pathologist assistant programs and things like that, or even PhDs and graduate work in kind of the clinical research world. So some of ours do go that route.
Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you once described this profession as the hidden profession. Not a good thing, but is it improving? Is this still true?
I think that moniker is actually starting to kind of fade, and I hope it's because of myself and other people are out there hammering on the pavement and on your show and other shows, and that's why I always appreciate you allowing me to kind of have this platform to discuss the medical lab. But yeah, that article that went viral back in 2014 or 15 is something now that I often like to talk about is fading. I really think we are making an impression at the national level about how critical our profession is. And that DCLS and those diagnostic kind of management teams that my colleague, Dr. Michael Laposada, talks about often at Galveston is really going to put us in front of patients. It's going to put us in front of nursing and physicians and PharmDs and others that are in the trenches of the visible healthcare professional. And I just see it improving as we go along. It is still incumbent upon our professionals, current, the older kind of techs that have been around for a long time, as well as the ones coming out, to stay in that kind of mindset that we have to get out of that lab and be more of a visible presence in our communities and describing what our jobs are, visiting high schools, visiting junior high schools, and discussing our career path and how exciting it can be.
All right. Well, that really brings me to what we're here for in the first place is Lab Week 2019. It's from April 21st to April 27. Pretty important week for the profession, right?
Absolutely. It's a great time to share the very thing we were just talking about, not only to celebrate our profession and how many wonderful pioneers have come prior to me and others and where we're headed with new pioneers, but certainly it's an opportunity within healthcare and elsewhere to kind of shine a light on our profession and, do some of that mingling with other healthcare professions, get out there in the public eye and talk about this profession. And of course, the social media aspect's really important, to share that across the spectrum with kind of the new generation of professional. And that's what I'm planning on doing. So not only with your podcast, but Dr. Laposado and Dr. Gonzalez, the first DCLS, we're putting together an article specifically discussing the DMTs and the DCLS. And so keep an eye out for that. That'll be out during that week, if not a day or two before, and hoping to kind of push that and other things surrounding that particular week.
Okay, so just as a reminder, Lab Week 2019 starts on April 21st. I believe that's a Sunday. And any final thoughts on the clinical laboratory profession, Lab Week, or anything else, Dr. Rohde?
One quick thing that I would like to add, and I've been discussing this a lot with my colleagues and kind of reflecting on it over the past few years, and especially last week because I just got back from my state conference, is one of the areas that we really want to share with our audiences is the new professionals and how excited we are about kind of the 22-year-old to 30-year-old kind of recent grads that are really starting their careers and venturing out, is how critically important it is for them to stay connected to the professional through their state, local, and national organizations to become kind of promoters of the profession and to help us share that awareness. So I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, as always, to share this importance.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Rodney Rohde, for joining me for another Lab Week. I really appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, Robert.
And don't forget to check us out at the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, the podcast, Outbreak News Interviews, which can be found on the website, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, and Spotify. and the Outbreak News This Week radio show, which is aired Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the Tampa Bay area on AM 1380 The Biz, or online streaming at 1380thebiz.com. And check out our social media presence, Facebook at Infectious Disease News, and Twitter at BackDman63. Outbreak News TV is a production of The Global Dispatch. Copyright The Global Dispatch Incorporated, 2019.